Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I wanted to go over the three major changes in the AK family, the three generational changes, specifically with 7.62x39 AK variants. Big changes that the Russians did starting way back with the AK-47 going into the AKM and really hitting its high water mark, its real peak with the 100 series 103. So today we're going to talk about the differences between these three main changes in the AK family, what it truly means to be an AK-47, an AKM, or a 103. Before we get into these three awesome guns, if you like this channel and you like what we do and you feel so inclined to support us, well, we don't do Patreon and we don't do random ads for razors for your ball sacks. What we do have is merch. Just go by thirdpinthreads.com. We have some really cool hats. We have some really cool AK merch, t-shirts and hats. That's the best way to support us and you get something for your money. And you never know. Sometimes we'll throw in some candy. We'll always throw in some stickers with your order. And it's greatly appreciated, so thank you. Back to the video. Let's start here, 1955 to 1959, the Type 3. This was following the Type 1 and Type 2. Type 1 was basically after the Russians had prototyped a bunch of different guns around 7.62x39. They came up with what they wanted all along really was a stamped carbine. So they came up with the Type 1, which was a stamped AK-47, the first AK-47. Didn't quite have the stamping process down, so they transitioned to the Type 2, which is where the milled receiver was born. And it didn't stick around long. It was really just a bridge to get to the final product, the Type 3 in 1955, which is what you see here. It's the absolute high watermark as far as the milled AKs go back then. And this was the one that they made a lot of. They're very famous. They're produced by a bunch of different other countries. Bulgaria made them, Poland, East Germany, North Korea, Hungary, and China all made variants of the Type 3 under contract. And they're all very good guns. So when you hear someone say milled or AK-47, this is what they mean. So if you're buying parts or you're buying a gun and you kind of need to know, like, a lot of stuff's going to be proprietary for a milled gun, mainly the furniture. So let's go ahead and tell you what's a little unique about this, and then we'll transition to a later generation. You have a big steel milled receiver with huge lightning cuts. You can't miss them. Very iconic as far as AKs goes. A big chunky boy milled receiver. The trunnion and the stock mounting tangs are all one piece. So this is way before riveting a trunnion into a receiver. It's all one big chunk of metal, all milled into a gun. It takes many hours. Even to this day, Bulgaria is making milled AKs, and they claim it takes 6 hours per receiver on the lathe to turn it into a receiver. Still a very long, drawn-out process. These guns are inherently smooth. Super smooth actions. They actually have telescopic recoil rods that honestly kind of aid in the smoothness of the action, and you would have seen later in life with RPKs, but they ditched that type of recoil rod after the Type 3. When they went to the AKM later, that was no longer a thing. The furniture on these is pretty unique. The rear stock actually mounts with two tangs. So this will not work on any generation after this. This is just a Type 3 stock. It'll only work on Type 3 variants. Lower handguard, same way. This will only work on Type 3 variants. You have a little ferrule here that helps the wood mesh to the receiver. The upper handguard, they kind of got that right. This is actually interchangeable with later AK variants. You have a big, thick, smooth dust cover. You have a bolt carrier that's pretty polished in the white. A lot of Type 3s were that way. Oh, by the way, this is a Polish kit built on a Bulgarian receiver. The barrels are slightly thicker than AKs that came later. They had 45-degree gas blocks, vented gas tubes, and the sling loop up front would have been mounted to the gas block. The rear sling loop would have been mounted to the receiver in this area. I just don't have one, but here's a picture of what that looks like. Sighting system is what you all know and love. They kind of got it right from the get-go. Adjustable rear leaf sight and a hooded front sight post. They kind of got this right from day one, and it virtually never changed. 14x1 left-hand threads, and these would have had thread protectors. I have a slant brake, but it would have had a thread protector or what is called a muzzle nut. And the cleaning rod is mounted underneath the barrel. The magazines around this era are what we call slab sides. Thick gauge steel, Big beefy magazines with no reinforcement ribs. They're smooth on the side, hence the name slab side. Very heavy duty, very robust, very strong magazines. And even for its age, being made in the 50s, would work in any 7.62x39 AK that ever came after it. They standardized 7.62x39 magazines to where it doesn't matter where your gun came from. If it's 7.62x39, all of the magazines interchange, no matter what. Cleaning kit would have been kept in the rear of the stock, something they never got away from. You'll see that in later generations too. Very smooth gun, a little heavy, but just a pure joy to shoot. These early Type 3s are so cool, but this only lasted until about 1959 when the Russians finally figured out how to get the stamping process down, and then they developed the gun they really always wanted from day one. A cheap, quick to produce, lightweight, very rugged, very heavy duty gun. So in 1959 the AKM was born. So let me show you one of those. 1959 to 1977 you have the AKM, which stands for the Avtomat Kalashnikova Modernized. Finally, they did what the Germans were doing way back in the 40s, and they had mastered the stamping process and completely overhauled the gun from head to toe. This is a huge step forward and just a better gun overall. Number one, it's the most popular, most widely produced, most widely copied variant of all time. You'll see AKMs all over the freaking country. This gun would have been cloned by countries like Egypt, Romania, Hungary, Poland, and East Germany, and of course originally made by Russia. So you'll see kits from all different types of countries. Many were made. They're still being used today. These things are seen everywhere. AKM is definitely the most popular spec of AK. Virtually everyone's copying them even today. Even the American companies, they're trying to use the majority of AKM spec parts so that the aftermarket can support them. So what makes an AKM an AKM? You have the stamped receiver, which we've gone away from a big chunk of steel that's milled into a receiver. You now have a flat that is bent into a receiver, and the components are all either welded in place or riveted in place. The rails on the inside that the carrier rides on are tack welded in place. You can probably see, it's gonna be a little hard to see. You can see tiny little spot welds here and there. The front trunnion is now riveted in place. And something I didn't say earlier about the Type 3, but the barrel is actually threaded in place. Should have mentioned that before, but now we've gone away from a threaded barrel and we've now gone into a pressed. The barrel is pressed into the trunnion with a lot of pressure. It is cross drilled and pinned in place, which is what you are seeing here. No longer threaded, now pressed in, pinned in place. It is a much lighter gun. Might not be as smooth, but every AK will smoothen up over time with a lot of shooting. They can be tuned to be smoother, but because it's all stamped bits of metal made to work, it's not going to be as smooth as the outgoing Type 3. AKM furniture will not work on milled guns. The upper handguard will, lower and the stock will not work. The grips are interchangeable virtually across all platforms. The rear stock, as you can see, has a slightly different shape, doesn't quite have the down swoop, and of course only has the single tang in the rear and is now riveted in place. It is not part of the receiver anymore. Cleaning kit still on the stock, that virtually never changes. The dust cover is a slightly thinner gauge steel and now has reinforcement ribs to add a little bit of strength. You can see mag dimples here to help put a little resistance on the mag to keep it a little bit tighter. The barrel profile is slightly thinner than the outgoing milled Type 3. Still same length, still the same thread pitch, 14x1, and the sighting system is virtually unchanged. Hooded front sight post, adjustable rear leaf. The lower handguard now has palm swells. You can see there it's a bit thicker, gives you a little bit more to grab onto. Still have vent holes here. No heat shields or anything, that came later. And we still have our cleaning rod retained under the barrel. Quickly, the sling loops have changed. It's no longer on the front gas block, it's now on the lower handguard retainer. And the rear has now been moved to the stock, no longer on the side of the receiver. Big thing that you start to see on AKMs is the optic mounting rail riveted onto the side for like night vision or, you know, whatever. All different types of things were mounted onto the AK from this rail, and you would not have seen that on the earlier milled versions. Internally, virtually the same. The recoil spring has slightly changed. It's not telescopic anymore. Now it kind of has like what we call the coat hanger style. Trigger components are virtually the same. bolt and carrier virtually the same, and the safety is virtually the same. So now that we have looked at probably the most iconic variant of the AK ever made, the 7.62x39 AKM, with some really nice laminate wood with a full 16-inch barrel and that slant brake, super iconic. This is about as notable as it gets. Like, you can show this to anyone on the planet and they'll instantly say that's an AK-47, even though technically it's an AKM, but everyone calls every AK an AK-47. Just is what it is. So this would have ran from 59 to 77. By that time, you would have already seen the AK-74 become a thing. So I want to show you a 74 quickly because it greatly influenced what came later in the 90s, which is probably as good as the AK ever got. Oh, spaghetti, oh. So this is your pretty standard AK-74, full-length 16-inch barrel with a fixed stock. The gun, compared to an AKM, is virtually the same. Just a few subtle changes, obviously the big caliber change, but the big thing here I wanted to show you was the front end. This is where you would have seen 90-degree gas blocks. So the Type 3 and the AKM both had 45-degree gas blocks. It really wasn't changed much at all. Now you see this drastic change in the gas block. And a big change here is the front sight post. You now have the front sight post and the threads are all one piece, and they've gone to a 24mm right-hand thread, and you see the very iconic 74 style muzzle brake become a thing. Can't put this muzzle brake on any AK that came before it, and you certainly can't put the small 14x1 thread protector or the slant brake on this style sight post because the thread pitch has completely changed. Later AK-74s like 74Ms and Crinks or 74Us would have gone to a rear trunnion that allows to mount a folding stock. This would have used a 5.5mm hinge pin with a push button and a latch. You would have seen the triangle folders become a thing. And now if you fast forward all the way to 1994, the Russians wanted to develop a family of AK that shared as many parts as they possibly could across all calibers. So from 7.62x39 to 5.45x39 to 5.56. Yes, they made a lot of 5.56 AKs. They wanted them to all be made at the same factory and share a ton of parts, but only have a couple of parts differ when they wanted to change calibers. So you get into the 100 series of AK now. So in 1994 until basically forever, still to this day, you have the AK-103 and all the other AKs that were made at this time. This is the high water mark. This is king of the castle. This is as good as a 7.62x39 AK ever got. And I think most people would agree with me there. So the later 74M had the folding stock that we talked about, and that of course was made 100% standard on all 100 series AKs. They all have side folding rear trunnions with a 5.5 hinge pin, little push button here on the side, allows you to fold the stock, and there's a small keeper here that allows you to lock the stock in place. Another push button, it deploys. It is one of the best, if not the best stock ever made from factory for an AK ever. And now you can see that they've gone to a plastic or a polymer, a futuristic synthetic type of stock. No worries about water. They're just very rugged stocks, and just a little Easter egg, they still keep the cleaning kit in the stock. Awesome. It just never changed. Of course, up front, you will notice that this is virtually an AK-74 front end, even though it's 7.62x39. They wanted all the guns they were making at this time to share all the parts. Only change a couple things. We're talking the barrel, the bolt, and possibly even the bullet guide. That's really all you needed to change. And of course, you know, the opening and the bottom for mags for caliber changes. But the majority of these parts were not caliber specific, so they didn't have to change up a ton of stuff making different calibered AKs at this time. But you can see they all had 90-degree gas blocks, no more vents in the gas tube. The barrel profile was the same, front sight post was the same, and of course still we had those 24mm threads and the 74 style muzzle device held on by a spring-loaded detent, which is also something that virtually never changed from way back. So if you were to put a 74 mag in this, you wouldn't be able to tell that it is a 7.62x39 AK. It's just that similar to how they would have been making 5.45s and 5.56s at the time with the 100 series. So moving from the AKM on into this, of course we've talked about a few things, but the furniture is a big one, moving into the plastic furniture on the stock, the grip, and the upper and lower handguard. Lower handguard still has the palm swells that you would have seen on the wooden lower handguards from before, but now we actually have a heat shield on the inside of this to buck the heat a bit better. The shape of the pistol grip is the same, but now it is made of the same type of plastic. Magazine technology changed as well. Now gone into polymer magazines. Basically, it's injection molded, and internally there's going to be a bit of a cage with a spine. So if you were to melt everything off of here, you'll see a cage going all the way up to your feed lips and your locking lugs, and a reinforcement spine front and rear, making these some of the most durable, strongest mags ever made. Very comparable to the Bulgarian Circle 10s. Best thing about these, unlike metal mags, they don't have memory like metal does. You can't really dent these like you could a metal mag. A dent in the right spot on a metal mag, that mag's done. Can't use it anymore. And that's where these mags really shine, and they are much lighter. Like night and day, much lighter mags. Of course, these would have all had optic rails, same, still have mag dimples. This is something that you would have seen that would have been new. Kicker rivet, bump rivet, just something that was never really there before. This actually helps kick the bolt in place when it's locking, when it's chambering around. Really something you only see on the Russian guns. I don't believe anyone really even cloned that rivet, which is why people kind of like the KUSA clones, because they put the bump rivet there. Do you need it? Not necessarily, but it's just cool if you want to be like clone correct. It's there, but that's just something unique to these guns. Sling mounting has not changed up front, still on the lower handguard, but it has changed in the rear. It's now moved to the other side of the stock towards the receiver here. And the dust cover is now back to the way it was on a Type 3. It's gone back to a thicker gauge steel, smooth dust cover, not the thin, ribbed dust cover from the AKM. It is funny how things kind of came back all the way from the Type 3 into this thing, and how they carried over bits from the 74. Most of it is still AKM spec from the AKM. Another thing that changed on these internally would be the bolt. It's a thin stemmed bolt. Everything before that would have had a thick stem bolt if it was 7.62 by 3.9. They did this, again, 100 series. The stem of the bolt does not change, the diameter does not change based on caliber. 5.45, 5.56, 7.62 bolts all have thin stems. So that means the carrier is the same, doesn't matter. The bolt face does, though, but that just means they didn't have to make a bunch of different carriers for a bunch of different guns. Just the bolt changes. Anyway, this is what most people would say is the best 7.62 AK that one can have. It's as modern as it can be, where it's still so familiar, still easily recognizable as an AK. If you've grown up shooting a milled AK, an AKM, even an AK-74, this is, I mean, it's like it's exactly the same. Everything's in the same place. The safety, the reciprocating charging handle, the way that you mount optics, the way it shoulders, the shape of the stock, the shape of the handguard, the sighting system, the way the mag locks in, it's all the same. And this is honestly about as good as it gets. It's super light. You now have your folding stock. The sling loops are in a really awesome place. You have the best muzzle device ever from factory on your AK, and it's very easy to mount suppressors like a PBS-1 style suppressor on these guys. And of course, you still have your cleaning rod. Later, you started to get into like a bunch of weird prototypes. You see like the AN-94, the counterbalance AKs. We start to see the early prototypes of the AK-12, and now that we see the AK-12, we know all about the AK-12. A lot of people are just thinking, why? I mean, I would just take a 100 series AK, most likely like a 100 series 74. It's just so familiar. Everything on it works perfectly, and with some modern aftermarket, you can have a really nice optic, a suppressor. Like, they are great guns. After shooting several AK-12s and seeing a ton of really great videos from like 9-Hole and Brandon and Polnar Tactical, I think for the most part we can see that the AK-12 is really a step in like no direction. Like, what problems does it solve? It really doesn't do much that these did. And these don't have any of the drawbacks that the AK-12 does. They do all the same things without any of the drawbacks, and they're extremely familiar. If you know how to run an AK, there's nothing that changes. It's all the same. Anyway, rant over about the AK-12, but that's really it, man. I just really wanted to, now that I have all three variants here, I wanted to show you the differences in the three big generational changes of 7.62 by 39 AKs and what someone means when they say like a milled AK-47 to an AKM to a 100 series, and you even got to see a 74. Maybe one day we'll make another video that talks about all the different stuff, even like Yugo pattern stuff, because I get questions all the time about like furniture compatibility and what makes this AK better than that one. Is it because it was made here? Is it because it's an AKM? There's just, it's a huge rabbit hole. Hopefully this video answered some of those questions. But anyway, this AK in general, SGL 2194, the closest thing this country ever got to an AK-103, is now my prized possession. And we're going to do a whole video on this gun because there's a really cool special story behind it and a really special person behind this gun. That's for a later video. I'm going to have to like write a script on that. Like there's so much I want to say. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. If you like this kind of content, let us know down in the comments. Go by Third Pin Threads, the best way to support us. If you had to pick between the milled Type 3, a nice AKM, or an AK-103, what would you pick? What would be like your prime time primo AK? Let me know in the comments down below. Pretty sure everyone's going to say 103. But anyway, we'll see you next time.